Your baby is crying and you can't work out what's wrong. There's a time when you just want them to tell you, right? Wouldn't it be great to know what your baby is trying to tell you? If you're looking for the code to the secret language, then you're going to learn lots in today's episode. I'm talking with Sonja Preston, who is a Dunstan Baby Language, also known as DBL trainer. Sonja demystifies some of the sounds for you and tells you all about this fascinating language. I'm infant massage instructor Helen Thompson. Hello and welcome to First Time Mums Chat. Being a parent for the first time is challenging and changes your life in every way imaginable. To help ease your transition into parenthood, I aim to offer supportive, holistic approaches and insights for mums of babies aged 4 weeks to 10 months old. My goal is to assist you to become the most confident parent you can and smooth out the bumps along the way. This podcast is brought to you by My Baby Massage, so let's do this together. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Please contact a medical practitioner if you are concerned or have any medical issues. Hi Sonja, and welcome to First Time Mums Chat. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here because I've heard all about Dunstan Baby Language before, and I know how valuable it is, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for my first time mums, especially when the babies come home from hospital and mums are thinking, help, what does that sound mean? So can you start by just telling us a little bit about Dunstan Baby Language and where it comes from and etc.?
Sure. Thanks, Helen. Yes, so I first heard about it. I had been working for the Department of Education in New South Wales as a parenting consultant, visiting parents in their homes from pregnancy through till the child turned 3. And it was actually one of my parents who told me about it. Do you know about Dunstan? And I was like, no, what is it? And she lent me, at that time it was a DVD, so she lent that to me. And it was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. You know, that's the general response people have, because when I played it, and I'll explain what it means in a minute, but when I played it, my ears already knew those sounds because I've been working with mums and babies at that stage for towards 20 years. And even though I couldn't have told you what the words were, I recognised the sound of them. And that's actually exactly how Priscilla Dunstan, was the original founder of it, how she started this, because she has auditory memory. And when her first child was born, Tom, she thought she could hear different sounds, different quality of sounds, different tonality. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but she recognised there was a difference in his different cries from when he was hungry to tired to had wind and so forth. So she originally thought, well, I'm just good with my ears. But then if she knew you and she heard your baby cry, she'd go, Helen, is your baby hungry? And, you know, many of us in those gaga early days, we look at our phone or our watch to go, oh, yes, I didn't realise he hasn't had a feed for a while. And so she thought, well, okay, it must be, maybe it's Anglo, maybe it's, you know, white people sort of thing. Our babies make these sounds. But then she'd hear just in her community, you know, maybe Chinese babies or German babies, and they all did these same sounds that she knew were hunger or tired. And so that led to, it was about 10 years of studies and research, and and this was globally. Then it led to what became known as Dunstan Baby Language, because what she'd identified through these studies was that these sounds are nothing to do with language and cultural group or socioeconomic group, but they're to do with reflexes. So, for example, when the baby's hungry, it automatically the hunger triggers the sucking reflex. So when infants, and we're talking newborns from birth through till about 4-ish months old in particular, when they're hungry, the sucking reflex starts, and when that happens, their tongue goes to the top of the roof of their mouth and down in a movement to then compress the nipple or the teat to get the milk. And when we replicate that, when babies put sound to it, as happens with infants, the only sound you can make, and this is my version of it, is ne, ne, because then the tongue's up and then down. And it's an N sound you're listening for that tells you the baby is hungry. Now, if at that point you as a parent recognise it and feed them, they will latch on well, they will suck well and, clearly satisfy their need to be fed. So I've actually got a recording here with the sounds on if you'd like to listen. There's about 6 babies, different babies, because just like you and I are speaking slightly different versions of the same words, babies are the same. And it also depends where the baby's just starting off to say, Mum, I'm hungry, Mum, I'm hungry, or they're actually screaming, for goodness sake, Mum, I'm starving here, that their volume increases. Mm-hmm. So in these sounds, you're listening for an N sound at the beginning. And sometimes it can be a little bit like nasally, like if I pinch my nose and say it, it's ne, ne. So it's slightly nasally twang to me. So I'll play these, but listen for the N sound.
Okay, I'm curious to hear the sound. So you can definitely hear that ne, ne, ne.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely hear that ne,
Yeah, and in that last one, the baby's reaching that crying sound where they're saying, I'm really hungry. Mm. And so when we look at these reflex-based sounds in infants, we're trying to get in when we first hear the baby articulate a sound, because as we could hear in that one, the babies increase in volume. And when they are really hungry or really tired and they've been telling you that, and for whatever reason you haven't
been listening, yeah.
Well, yeah, but you might have been busy hanging out the nappies or putting the nappy in the bin or whatever. The intensity increases, and then when they're full on screaming, you can't actually hear the sound at all. It's lost in, at that time, distress cry. I'm really upset that you haven't met my need.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about, I come from a childcare background and I also do baby massage, and it's just interesting you mention reflexes, because am I right in saying that when they latch onto the breast, that's called the rooting? Is that the rooting reflex? When they're latching onto the breast, and am I right, or is that not?
The rooting is when they're hungry, and they've probably made this sound already, because the sound comes before the visual clues. But the visual clues, what we call rooting, is when they're turning the head, looking in the direction or seeking the breath of the bottle, and they might be sort of nuzzling down onto whatever's close by. So it could be your shoulder that they then try and suck that because they know it's here somewhere. So that's what we call rooting in the feeding context.
Yeah, and I know you can also tell with when you're doing the language, you can always tell if they've got wind or colic, or not so much a colic, but more of the wind. If they've got stuck wind, there's a particular sound for that, isn't there?
Yeah, so we look at the 5 sounds that we see are most critical when you've got a newborn and you're going through that period of, what happens when you have a newborn, whether it's your second or third child or your first one, is you've got to connect with this child to be able to understand each other. Yeah. And the baby cries, and our immediate response as human beings is, oh, they must be hungry. So you try and feed them, breast or bottle, and, they might suck a little bit. But if that's not what they really wanted, then we might think, he or she's got wind, and we try to burp them. But then that might not be what they want. They must have a wet nappy. So we then move on to that. But what if right at the beginning they're actually saying, I'm really tired, I want to go to sleep. Mm-hmm. And we've now stimulated them with all these other things and quite possibly irritated them because I'm really tired and you're feeding me and burping me and changing me. So the 5 sounds we focus on are hunger, tired, wind in the upper chest, wind in the lower part of their body, and when the skin is irritated. So if I just go through those quickly, so the tired sound is actually just like a yawn. So it's, oh. So when we write it, we write O-W-H. So it's, an O or an ow sound. When we've got wind in the upper chest, the muscles in the upper portion of our chest are contracting, squeezing, whatever word you want to call it, to try and bring that burp up. But when an infant is newborn, all their muscles are weak because they haven't had much chance outside to practice it.
Of course,
so, I mean, by the time you have a 3-4 month old, they know how to burp and they often belch quite loud. So what happens with the burping is their muscles are contracting to try and bring it up, but they can't quite do it themselves.
Of course,
and you'll often notice they're making that sound are actually squirming around a little bit, like they're trying to shake it up or wriggle it up. So the burp sound is an EH sound, so it's repeated. So it's and then they're not really distressed, they're just uncomfortable. So if you can hear that and you burp them, you've relieved that need to burp. And then they may actually then start making the net sound saying, I'm hungry, I'm ready now to go back on the breast. So if you are breastfeeding a baby and they pull off or come off a little bit, they're either had their full complement of what they need of food at that time, or they're pulling off because they've got wind. And quite possibly, if you listen well, then you'll hear the sound, which tells you they've pulled off because they've got a burp to come up, they've got wind. When you bring that up, they'll often start the net sound again, put back on the breast or the bottle.
That actually sounds very interesting, because it sounds like, when you said it sounds as if they're sort of stuck, something stuck in their chest. So it's obviously, it's an interesting concept to think that that's what it actually means.
Yes, and the S sound in terms of our 5 sounds is important. I mean, they all are in different ways, but it's important because what happens is if the baby has wind in the upper portion of the chest, we really want it to come up as a burp, right? You imagine if you, as a parent, you don't know this, or you miss the clues, or they just do it very softly, so you might not hear it that well. When you move on, you may think, oh, they're still hungry, so I'll give them more of the bottle or the breast. You put milk in on top of a bubble. So there's a couple of things that can happen. The bubble might be stronger and come up, and they might do what we call posseting, when they just sort of spit out a bit of milk with the burp. If there's a lot of milk gone in on top of the bubble and the bubble is big enough or strong enough, it will come up and they'll do what people call projectile vomiting, where the mum or the dad and half the lounge room gets covered in milky vomit.
Yes, I've seen that before.
Yes, but the bigger problem is, I mean, none of us want to deal with a messy floor or table or clothing ourselves, but the bigger problem is if that wind doesn't come up and we put more milk on, that pushes the air down, that then has a long way through to get through our bodies before it comes out at the other end as wind or a fart. And that is what is often known as colic, because it's quite painful to go through all that body in terms of, you've all seen pictures of your guts and your bowel and so forth, but there's a lot of meters to go through before it actually comes out the other end.
Of course.
And that's what you see. That's what we call colic, but that's one of our sounds, is this sound, which I should play for you in a moment. But at that point in time, the babies are pulling their knees up to their chest.
And screaming,
Yeah, and the scream is intense and urgent and goes on and on and on, and they're very red in the face, angry looking. And so this is why the sound, the wind in the upper chest, is so important for parents to be able to hear, because you actually want to avoid hearing the air where they're in quite a lot of pain. So I'm going to play this for you now.
Okay,
and it's quite intense, and the babies are definitely not happy.
Okay. Sounds as though the baby's a bit constipated and stuck. It sounds,
Yeah.
Now it's getting really intense, as if to say, help me. Yeah.
Yes. So that's the one we want to avoid, because you could hear, and they're quite upset at that point in time. And I recognise now that my first daughter had that. She screamed for what seemed like hours, and she was my first child. So what happens then is when the baby's crying and crying and crying, and I as a mum, I go, I've tried to feed them, I've tried to burp them, I've changed their nappy, nothing's working. And the frustration in you as a parent that you can't help your baby because you don't know what's wrong, it's quite intense. And postnatal depression is a variety of things. But one of the components I feel is, that feeling like I'm not coping, I'm not good at this parenting thing, I'm inadequate. And we don't want parents to feel that, because it's awful.
Of course not. Because that's what the baby massage should have come in, from my point of view, is the massage with colic. Because if the mums are so distressed, they're thinking, help, what can I do? And if they've missed that sound, well, then, I guess the next stage is to sort of help them with, trying to say, get the baby to help get all the colic and the bubbles out of the tummy. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of baby massage it's relaxing for both mum and baby, or dad and baby, and a good way of connecting and so forth. But yes, it can be very useful to help push out wind when the baby's making that sound. But then I know for myself, if I had a really pain in my belly, which was wind, for me personally, I wouldn't want anybody touching my tummy because it's too sensitive. So
yes, true, but it's how you do it. Yeah, that's true. But absolutely. If you can hear the sound first, well, then it would relieve that. So I think that's the advantage of the baby language, because you can actually hear the sound and you can say, oh, right, my baby needs to be burped, or my baby's got a bit of wind, I'll burp him, and if it's still going, I can give him a little massage or totally. Do whatever, and at least it's the baby's feeling relieved, and you are, because you've been able to help the baby.
Yes, absolutely. So the fifth sound that we've got, so we've had hungry, tired, wind in the upper, wind in the lower body, and then the fifth sound focus on is when the skin is irritated. So that could be when the nappy needs changing because it's wet or pooey, or the baby's too hot or too cold. Mm-hmm. They might be just uncomfortable where they're lying. So the skin is irritated. And this sound is like, it's similar to when a dog is panting. So it's H-E-H. So it's and it can be slow, it can be quieter or louder sort of thing. But they're just unhappy in some way with temperature or something on their skin. I sort of wonder too whether, you hear of people who have allergies, or they don't like wool on their skin, which is so beautiful, but other people find
exactly.
Yeah. So whether or not they might also have that HEH response. So, and at that stage, obviously, you check whether their nappy was okay, or whether they need more or less clothing, etc. So by learning these sounds, for the parent to learn these 5 sounds, it just gives them the tool they need to start their baby in a good way, and their relationship with the child in terms of parenting in a good way, because they're more easily able to identify what this baby actually wants and provide it for them. The baby's content, which is always nice. The parent, whether it's mum, dad, or grandma, or caregiver, whoever, is feeling, I can do this parenting thing, so I feel more confident. And when we have a content child and a confident parent, it has a ripple effect, because I, as the mum or the dad, I go out in the community feeling better about me and my child and our relationship. And that ripple effect, you know what it's like when you meet happy, positive people. It's nice to be around, Yes, and I'm not saying motivation, but it's got positive mental health spin-offs for both baby and parent and the community.
No, I think that's amazing, because as you say, it helps parents to be more confident, and that's at the end of the day what you want first-time mums, or any mum really, to be, whether they're first-time mums or second time mums, at least if they can know what their baby's trying to tell them, because and most parents know that babies cry for a reason. They're not just crying for the sake of it. They are actually crying for a reason because they're trying to communicate with us.
Totally.
And knowing those sounds is good.
Absolutely. And I used to be a classroom teacher. And when we look at literacy in children or in adults, there's the 4 components: that is speaking, listening, yes, reading, and writing. And all of them also have a component of comprehension attached to it. So if you look at babies and these beginning sounds, it's the first level of communication. And so really by us learning their language in terms of these sound productions, we're actually helping the baby to learn early communication, because I, as an infant, cry to say, I've got a wet nappy. You, as a parent, understand my language and respond. So what happens then is a contentment in the baby. But there's also a really interesting component to this too, which Dunstan fits into what's called attachment theory. So attachment theory, I'll just step back. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, we used to talk about mothers bonding with their babies, meaning, I'm listening to my baby and I'm looking for clues and I fall in love with my baby. Very important.
Absolutely.
What they've realised is there's more to it than that. So when an infant learns to trust its caregiver or caregivers, in that I cry to say I'm hungry and the parent feeds me, I learn to trust that person to look after me. And when babies have, none of us are 100% in that. Sometimes we can't tend to the baby right now, but in a general sense, if we predominantly are responding, then the baby has this sense of trust. And that's what we call secure attachment. I trust this parent will look after me. If you have parents, for a whole host of reasons, they may have mental health issues, drugs and alcohol, postnatal depression, a whole lot of reasons that they can't be as attentive, the baby doesn't get that attachment. And as long as the parents are getting some help for those things, it can be turned around. What happens when you get secure attachment is it actually leads to brain development, new neural pathways forming in the brain. So when a baby has trust with the parent caregiver, when they become older and they start crawling, for example, they can crawl over to another part of the room, knowing that if they get lost or bump their head or can't get out of the corner or something like that, they know I can trust my parent caregiver to come and help me. So by exploring that part of the world, they've actually stimulated new brain development, because I now know what's in this portion of the world and I've had new vision, new sounds, smells, whatever it might be. So, it is really instrumental in setting up that secure attachment in terms of mental health well-being.
Oh, I didn't know. Yeah, well, I can understand that from my background, but for parents who didn't know that, I think that's very valuable for them to know that. So it's good. Yeah. So if parents want to find out more about you, how can they do that?
Probably the easiest way is to go to my website. So my business is called the Parenting Cafe. Yeah, so how I teach the parents is they book in for a class, and it's all online at the moment. It's just easier with variations in travel and stuff, but they can book online, and in each month there's 2 or 3 classes on. Each class is 2 separate sessions a week apart, and I run some in the day, some in the evening, some on weekends, just to capture different parents. It's best done when the parent is in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, or as early as possible after birth, but in that first 4 months. And the reason starting in pregnancy is if you learnt this in your 2nd, 3rd month of pregnancy, by the time baby arrives 5, 6 months later, you've probably forgotten it. Yes, so by doing it as close to delivery as possible, those sounds become embedded. And so in the course, we go through obviously more detail about what the sounds are, how they're produced. We practice making the sounds so the parents physically can understand how they're replicated. And we look at solutions. So when the baby's hungry, obviously we know to feed it, but how do we feed the baby? So we look at different positions for breast or bottle feeding, and the same with burping and the lower wind pain and so forth. Yeah, and there's usually maybe 6, 8 parents max in a group, but I will run it with just 1 or 2. It's important to get this out.
No, thank you, Sonja. That's really good. That's really good, because it's always good for parents to know where to get this information from. I've actually learned a lot more about it than I thought. A lot more, and I'm intrigued. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast, Sonja. It's been very, very informative, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Helen, for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
I hope you find this fascinating peek into DBL as interesting as I did. You can find all about DBL from Sonja's website, theparentingcafe.com.au/DBL. You can also contact Sonja or book a workshop via her website. I've included some further information on DBL in the show notes, which can be accessed at mybabymassage.net/podcast/021. I've also started a new Facebook group called First Time Mums Lounge, so please join us and you'll gain access to tips to help you and your baby through the beginning stages of your journey. You can access this group by going to mybabymassage.net/Facebook. And once again, thank you so much for listening.